In this guide, we're going to break down the most important mechanics for you to learn in League of Legends and make them simple, easy to understand, and easy to implement in your own games. There's a problem right now when it comes to learning mechanics in League. I'm sure you've experienced it yourself. Most guides that you find online teaching mechanics will teach you crazy combos or some unrealistic way of kiting that makes you look really cool but isn't exactly practical. That's why we knew we had to make this video. What we've done is identify the 15 most important mechanics, and by important, we mean you'll not only be using these mechanics every single game, but by improving at them, you'll see the biggest increase in your win rate. And no matter what role you play or type of champion or rank you're in, we've made sure to include mechanics for everyone. So even if one of these doesn't apply to you, a ton of them will, so make sure to watch until the end. Also, we have a special limited time offer. We want you to go out and try to implement the mechanics you're about to learn in this video. From there, identify one mechanic that you're struggling with, that you just can't seem to get the hang of, despite trying to implement what we'll teach you in this guide. Then, go to our website. You'll find the full course for this video there. Simply scroll down to the comments section in that course, and we'll have a link to a Google form where you can submit a replay of yours where you struggled with that mechanic. This will also give you the opportunity to ask any questions you have, tell us what about it you're struggling with, and more. We will then be taking your submissions and expanding the course using your replays, where we go into further detail teaching the mechanics you guys struggled with the most. We already have over 2 hours of this additional content live on our website right now. Do keep in mind though, submissions will only be accepted for 1 month after this video goes live, so don't miss your opportunity. And if that wasn't enough, to sweeten the deal, we've added a discount link in the description below, so make sure to check it out after this. Alright, so let's get into our first mechanic called spacing. The reason we wanted to start with the spacing mechanic is that it's something that is occurring throughout the entire laning phase and even team fights. It's one of the most important mechanics for every player to master. At the same time, it's one of the mechanics that players find the most confusing due to people overcomplicating it when they teach it. At its core, spacing just means staying outside of the range of the enemy's spells. Let's use Ahri as an example. Her Q has a range of 900, and her E ability, which is her charm, has a range of 1000. And obviously to start, we will want to use the highest range ability of the opponent as our reference point. So all you have to do is stay outside the range of 1000 against Ahri, and boom, you're a spacing god. Well, not really, but it's what everything else you'll learn is built upon. So most players get this part, like duh, sit outside of a spell's range, that's common sense. Well, the problem is most players, including yourself, take this way too far. Like literally, you're standing way too far away. For example, let's say we're playing someone like Lux who has a range advantage over Ahri. Lux's E ability has a range of 1100 for context, and remember Ahri's max range is 1000 on her charm. If we stand too far back, well, sure, we're safe from Ahri, but we're also out of the range of our own Lux ability, so we're never going to land damage on Ahri. And this is why when pros and coaches talk about spacing, really what they mean is staying outside of the opponent's range while still being inside your own range. Remember, we know as Lux, we have around an extra 100 range to work with compared to Ahri. So we never want to be too far back or too far forward. It's like there's a Goldilocks zone every champion is trying to play in. And there are several benefits to playing within this Goldilocks zone. Firstly, as we just taught, if you're the one with the range advantage, well then you can freely land harass from safety. Secondly, spacing properly can easily bait skill shots to waste the enemy's mana and get big timing windows when their abilities are on cooldown. For example, here's the pro player Chovy on Victor against Ahri. Now, Victor only has one ability that outranges Ahri, it's his laser, which has a max range of 1050. But here's the thing about Victor's laser, it is notoriously bad early on. It does very little damage, has an insanely high cooldown, and costs way too much mana. So early on, this will effectively reduce his range to his Q, which is only 600. So how do we combat this range deficit as Victor in this matchup? Well, we can actually use spacing. All you have to do is what Chovy does here. Sit right outside of that maximum range of the enemy, so in this case it's Ahri with 1000 range, then just move slightly inside that 1000 range, then immediately click back out of it. Here's the key to this. You're not actually reacting to any skill shots or anything the enemy is doing. You're always preemptively clicking back out of their range. From the enemy's point of view, they'll see an enemy walking directly at them within their range, but by the time that registers in their brain and they cast their abilities, you've already preemptively clicked back out of their range. This not only makes them waste their mana, but more importantly, it will give you a large timing window while that ability is on cooldown to move up and land abilities of your own that are in that lower range. So now you're probably thinking, okay, so you're expecting me to learn every single range of every single ability in the game on every single champion. That does not sound very simple. To put this in perspective, if you wanted to learn only 50% of the champions, that's like 80 champions total, and with 3 basic abilities per champion, that's 240 ability ranges you would need to memorize. That's insane and totally unrealistic. So don't worry, there are some tips that we're going to teach you that will make practicing and learning spacing way easier. Firstly, you need to understand that each role will have certain champions you face way more often, and you want to focus on those champions first. Take mid lane for example. On the current patch that this guide was made, if we sort by pick rate and just learn the ranges of the 6 most picked mid laners, which are Sylas, Victor, Zed, Katarina, Yasuo, and Yone, you've now learned 52.9% of the matchups that you'll ever face in mid lane. So I'm sure you're starting to see where I'm going with this. Those 240 abilities you thought you had to memorize just to learn 50% of matchups is more like 18. At the same time, not every ability needs to be memorized, only the high threat ones. For example, Sylas is deceptively high range as a melee champion. His main poke, his Q ability, has a range of 955, and it has an engage range of 1200 on his E. In reality though, his E will get blocked by minions, so as long as you have minions protecting you, you just need to memorize that 955 range. And you know what champions this sounds a lot like? Ahri. Her Q range is 900, Sylas's is 955. Ahri's E range is 1000, Sylas's is 1200. Both of these champions actually have very similar playstyles in lane. They will try to use their Q for poke, getting you low to set up the all-in. They then have to land a skill shot, their E ability, which is longer range and gets blocked by minions, in order to then get the kill. This is the trick to learning a ton of matchups super fast. You just start with the most popular champion you'll face. In this case, it was Sylas. Then you'll realize, oh, Ahri is just kind of a slightly shorter range version of Sylas, so you just adjust your spacing to be ever so slightly closer. There are a lot of tricks like this to make ranges of champions more simplified. Another great one is when a champion has ranges on multiple abilities that overlap. A great example of this is Zed. He may seem very overwhelming to face with all of his abilities and how he has mobility, but in reality, he has one combo he uses. He casts W, which is a shadow, then his E to damage you and slow you, which then sets up him landing his Q. Well, guess what? That W and E combo has a range of 940. At the same time, his Q range is 925. So it actually becomes very easy to space against him once you realize as long as you're outside of 940 range, you really can't do anything. Again, use that trick we taught you earlier to weave in and out of that 940 range, and suddenly you have Zed putting his W, E, and Q on cooldown to literally do 0 damage. Oh, and by the way, his W has an insanely high cooldown early on of 20 seconds, so you can easily counterattack safely during that time. This is pretty much a lane-winning trick. And just like that, with Zed and Sylas being in 24.1% of your games on this patch, you've had to literally only learn one range for each of them, and you'll be spacing like a god in 1/4 of every game you play. And still, with all these tips, spacing can still be tough to learn, and it's because visualizing the range of spells in-game can be hard, but there's actually a trick to this too. All you have to do is use your own spell's range as reference. So for example, Zoe's Sleepy Bubble has a range of 800. Let's say you're playing Victor as an example. Well, his W also has a range of 800. So all you have to do if you're Victor facing a Zoe is pull up the range indicator on your W to remind yourself how far you need to be standing. And it doesn't always have to be that exact. For example, we all know how annoying Vladimir with his Q spam can be. Well, Vladimir's Q range is 600. And guess what? The most popular auto attack range for ranged champions is 550. So if you're playing Ahri into Vladimir, well, you know Ahri's auto attack range is 550. So all you have to do in that matchup, if you're Ahri, is to bring up your range indicator every so often. This way, you can remind yourself of where you need to stand. The key here is to just stand a little bit further away than the range indicator shows. This is because Vlad's Q range is 600, while your auto attack range will be 550. So that's pretty much everything you ever need to understand to begin mastering the mechanic of spacing. And this also makes a great transition to our next mechanic, auto spacing. And surprise, as the name implies, it's basically using what you just learned about spacing, but with your auto attacks instead. There's a very famous clip of the pro player Deft using this mechanic of auto spacing to completely outplay his opponent. And don't get me wrong, it's super impressive, it looks really cool, but honestly, it kind of makes auto spacing look way harder than it actually is. Here's the core thing you need to understand. The reason why auto spacing is different than regular spacing is because of how champions move differently when auto attacking compared to using spells. For example, if you're playing Orianna, you can cast spells while moving, so I could click to the side and then cast my ability and my movement doesn't change. However, if I try to auto attack as Orianna, my champion will always move in the direction where I issued that auto attack. It's this body language you can read on auto attack commands that makes auto spacing, well, a thing that exists. I'll explain how in a second. But essentially, all you need to know is that abilities can be really inconsistent about visually communicating a command has been issued, whereas with auto attacks, it's always super obvious. Alright, so let's start with the basics on this one. You need to first realize that sending movement commands also communicates visually where the enemy clicked. Notice how wherever I click, my champion immediately looks in that direction and walks towards it. And again, this will also apply to when I auto attack an enemy. My champion turns to face them and I move towards them. Once you understand this, auto spacing is incredibly easy to execute. You just need to try and auto attack an enemy when their body is facing away from you. This works because if they're facing away from you, well, at that moment, their mouse cursor is away from you and can't click back. At the same time, whenever the enemy turns and faces you, well, then it's your time to click away to get out of their auto attack range, since you now know they tried to issue an attack command on you. This is how this clip of Deft almost looks like a synchronized dance at one point. Deft is just making sure to click on the enemy when they turn away from him, since they can't auto attack back at that moment. Then, once the enemy turns around, he knows an attack command has been issued by the enemy, and so he now clicks back to get out of range. The main reason why this clip is so impressive is that both Xayah and Kai'Sa have the same auto attack range of 525. What this means is he's basically using auto spacing to play like he has a range advantage, when in reality they're exactly even. Now, I know, you're already thinking, that's like inhuman level reaction times. There's no way I can react that fast or click that fast. Well, here's the trick. You're not actually reacting. What you want to react to is the enemy clicking away from you. When you see their champion look away, that's the trigger to issue an attack command on them, since if you land an auto attack at that moment, they can't fight back. However, right after you issue that attack command, you want to preemptively click behind you to move back. This will do two things. First, if you aren't in range to immediately auto attack them, well, it prevents you from just walking forward into their range and taking an even trade. You can see Deft is doing this several times. He's clicking on Kai'Sa and then clicking back preemptively. No auto attack went off because he wasn't in range. That's why it looks like they're dancing, or like Deft has inhuman reaction times. All he's really doing is clicking on Kai'Sa when she looks away, and then follows it up, preemptively clicking behind him. Eventually, Kai'Sa messes up and walks in range too far forward, at which point, he's still doing the same mechanic of just clicking on Kai'Sa when she looks away, and then clicking back preemptively. The difference is, he's now in range to immediately auto attack, so he can damage her while still preemptively clicking back to dodge her auto attacks. It's really the same mechanic the entire time. Your only reaction is clicking on the enemy to issue an attack command when the enemy looks away, and then making sure to always preemptively click back after you've issued an attack command on them. And this is actually a perfect transition into our next mechanic that has to do with increasing your auto attack range. For example, here we see Caitlyn has an auto attack range of 650, which is 100 higher than Ezreal. And yet, by Caitlyn's second auto attack, she's well within Ezreal's range, and he can trade back. This is because there's actually a cooldown between your auto attacks, and attack speed is what accelerates this cooldown. What players don't realize is what happens when your auto attacks are on cooldown. You can see Caitlyn initially auto attacked Ezreal at her maximum attack range, but while her auto attack is on cooldown, the game will make her walk forward until her auto attack is off cooldown. And the solution to preventing this is the exact same as the previous mechanic. You need to click back right after issuing an attack command. Then, as your auto attack comes back off cooldown, you can click on the enemy to issue another attack command and repeat. This will prevent you from walking forward and make sure you're always staying at your maximum attack range. And as you can imagine, when you combine this mechanic with the previous one of timing your auto attacks when the enemy looks away from you, how you end up easily auto spacing like that pro player Deft. Alright, for our next section, let's focus on mechanics that will help you dodge enemy skill shots and just move better in general. The first thing you need to immediately start doing better is clicking far closer to your champion. When you click far away from your champion, it makes it incredibly hard to react to skill shots fast enough, as your mouse has to cover so much more distance just to input a movement command in a different direction. Compare this to when you're clicking close to your champion. There's less distance your mouse has to travel if you need to change directions, so you can end up reacting at insanely fast speeds. A lot of players aren't even aware that consciously clicking closer to your champion is a mechanic that all high-level players implement. In your own games, try to imagine a circle around your champion around this big. After analyzing pros, rarely do they exceed past this circle. Your goal is to keep your mouse within this circle when you issue movement commands. You then only move your mouse outside of the circle when you're issuing attack commands, firing skill shots, or panning your camera. And in addition to clicking closer to your champion, you also need to be clicking way more often than you currently are. For example, here's a Braun player on Tryndamere. I want you to pay attention to how often he's clicking with his mouse and issuing movement commands. It should be really obvious that his champion feels very slow and predictable. Now, compare this to a challenger, and you'll notice that they click almost twice as often. Now, let me explain why it's so important to click fast. Let's say you had to move to your left, and you're only allowed 4 mouse clicks. Due to how the game's auto-pathing is programmed, it makes your movement very smooth, and you change directions only 3 times. This kind of smoothness and minimal amount of direction changes makes you incredibly easy to predict and land skill shots on. Compare this to when you can click as many times as you want. It almost looks like you're jittery or glitchy. It makes you very hard to predict and know what your next move is. And since you're clicking far more often, it means if you need to dodge, you'll be able to change direction much faster. Whenever a player has a low amount of clicks in lane, it makes them not only easier to hit with these skill shots, but also just very easy to read on what they want to do. Compare this to a challenger player, and you'll notice it's very hard to get a read on them. They'll feel very jittery, and it's hard to predict whether they're trying to go aggressive or what direction they want to move. Essentially, you should make a conscious effort to click closer to your champion and more often, and you'll immediately see a boost to your mechanical skill. And now that we've covered dodging, let's talk about how to be far more accurate with skill shots. You see, League is 3-dimensional in appearance, but it actually operates as a 2D game. There's effectively only an X and Y axis to determine where you're standing. However, there is a Z axis, but it's only visual, and it's for elevation. Even though you can see Lux go up on the Z axis, don't be fooled, it's only visual. You would still need to aim at her original location to actually hit her. This concept of elevation only being visual also applies to high and low ground when landing skill shots in League. Here, Ahri lands her charm when her cursor isn't even on the Lux because she's aiming below her feet. Remember, whenever a champion is elevated in Summoner's Rift, it's a visual trick. The hitbox is always lower than it seems. This is why you actually want to aim below the enemy to compensate for this if they're on high ground. This is again proved here, where you can see when the cursor is much closer to Lux but placed above, it doesn't land because of the visual illusion. Here's the thing though, the opposite of this is also true when you're the one with the high ground. You will always need to aim above the enemy, as it will miss if you aim at their feet. So to summarize, the rules are, when the enemy is on the high ground, always aim at their feet. When you're the one on the high ground, always aim towards their head. And finally, if you're on even ground with the enemy, just aim at the center of their body. Another high-level mechanic every pro uses to land skill shots is what's called cutting off the angle. For this example, let's just say you're playing Elise and ganking an Ashe AD carry. Most players in this spot make the mistake of throwing out their skill shot way too early. This makes it very easy for the enemy to dodge, since there's so much distance between you and the opponent. It gives them a lot of time to react. Compare this to when you're right on top of the enemy. It doesn't matter how good they are, they can't dodge something that's point blank. And that's the thing, you can actually guarantee that you'll get a point blank skill shot. You just need to be aware of when you're in position to cut off the escape route of the enemy. And there's actually a very easy way to understand this. Let's say Elise and Ashe are next to each other, but Elise is a bit far behind. If both of them move forward in a perpendicular line, assuming both have similar movement speeds, Elise can never catch up to Ashe. However, if Elise takes an angled approach while Ashe walks straight, notice how there will eventually be a point where you're significantly closer to the enemy than before. On top of this, notice how if Ashe then matches Elise's angled approach, we're back to the same scenario as if they're moving straight. Elise can never catch up again. Well, here's the trick. Summoner's Rift doesn't have infinite space. There are boundaries with terrain. So if you're the one who takes an angled approach and the enemy does the same, well, they eventually just hit a wall and have to walk straight. And as we just demonstrated, if one person takes an angled approach while the other walks straight, there will always be that point where you're extremely close to them. So to go back to the original example, we know Ashe's escape path is to her tower. All we have to do now is cut off the angle, meaning take an angled approach and be patient. Eventually, you get to a point where you're the closest you can ever be. This is the most ideal time to land your skill shot since it has the least amount of distance to travel and is the hardest to dodge. Now, this sounds simple enough, and it really is, but against tougher opponents, they'll try to counter you cutting off the angle by doing random dodges to the side or behind, trying to preemptively dodge your skill shot. The biggest mistake you can make when they do this is to cast your skill shot early on. You see, since they're no longer moving in a straight line, it means you can now guarantee catch up to them. All you have to do is be patient and let them continue to try and preemptively dodge. You'll just gain more and more distance until you're literally right on top of them, and then you just land a point-blank skill shot. I can promise you, if you implement this into your own gameplay, it will make landing skill shots so much easier. And as you get better at it, you can actually start taking it to a higher level where you actually push people into terrain that traps them. The most common example of this technique is this space right here in between the tower and the wall. Once someone walks into this area, they can no longer move effectively side to side and are just a sitting duck. So whether it's just landing poke or all-inning off of crowd control, you want to look for opportunities to cut off the angle and funnel the enemy into that specific spot, as even if you're a decent distance away from them, they can't actually dodge any skill shots as they are literally stuck between a wall and a tower. Okay, so now let's try and switch focus to mechanics around last-hitting minions. I want you to stick with me here as I want to just highlight how impactful improving your CS by a very small amount can be. So statistically, the average game duration in gold is around 30 minutes. Now, a gold player who mains Ahri will average around 6 CS per minute, which equals to 180 CS on average per game. Now, on average, 1 CS is worth 22 gold. What this means is that around 4,000 of your total gold every game is going to be coming from your CS. Now, let's say you increased your CS per minute by just 1, meaning every minute you farmed 1 additional minion on average. Your average CS per game would go from 180 to 210, and you would earn an additional 620 gold every single game. This is actually more than 2 kills worth of gold for just 1 extra CS over an entire minute. Seems crazy, right? Well, here's what's even crazier. You know what rank averages 7 CS per minute on Ahri? Challenger. Yes, you heard me right. Literally, the gap between last hitting like a gold player and a challenger is only a difference of 1 CS per minute. Keep in mind, a minion wave will spawn every 30 seconds in game. Ignoring cannon minions, that's 12 CS you can achieve every single minute. So if you're in a lower rank like gold, you're only getting half of what you could be getting. All you have to do is kill 1 more minion every 2 waves, and you would be on par with a challenger. You're probably now thinking, well, improving at last hitting has to be way harder than I thought if the difference is that small. But it really isn't. The issue isn't their actual mechanical skill, it's just that most players aren't aware of 3 key mechanical tricks that makes last hitting just a lot easier that challenger players utilize. The first one is how tower focus works in League of Legends. When players get shoved under tower, they end up missing a ton of farm they don't need to because they don't understand how tower aggro actually works. Even though towers themselves are huge, their aggro radius is actually quite small. It's located right here. This is the secret spot nobody knows is actually where towers draw aggro from. Whichever minion is closest to the spot will be what the tower focuses next. So the next time you're shoved under your turret, simply look at this spot. Then identify which minion is closest to this point of aggro, and then you can prepare your last hits accordingly. The second one is about making the timing of your last hits far easier. You need to realize that what makes last hitting hard is that as a ranged champion, you'll be throwing out a missile that takes time to travel to minions. However, the travel time will change based on the distance of the minion. This is the hardest part about last hitting, timing the travel of your auto attacks with the health of the minion being low enough. A simple solution to this all challenger players utilize is they just walk right up next to a minion, then press the stop command. By default, this is bound to S on your keyboard. By standing next to the minion, you can just right click as soon as the minion's health is low enough and there's no travel time on your auto attacks, so it will just instantly be killed. This will effectively remove the hardest part about last hitting. Now, I already know some of you are thinking, I can't stand next to minions all game, or I'm just going to get hit by every skill shot known to man and lose my lane. And guess what? You're actually right. That's why you only use this in situations that the opponent is either zoned or just not in lane. There's actually a really good scenario to use this in. It's when the minion wave is slow pushing to the enemy. Trust me, before I knew this trick, I would easily miss like 50% of all my CS when it was slow pushing to the enemy. The problem is, when a wave is slow pushing, you have way too many minions. It makes it so that they damage the enemy minions incredibly fast, and so it's very hard to time your auto attacks before they die. This is why this trick is so useful. You can just stop command right next to them, and suddenly it's like you're CSing twice as good. And keep in mind, if you're slow pushing, well, the enemy can't trade into you without losing due to your giant wave, so you're often perfectly safe to do this mechanic without being punished for standing still. And our next mechanic is one that is probably the simplest, and yet is the one the least amount of people know about. Honestly, I'm not even lying when I say I kind of want to keep this secret to myself. This is probably one of those mechanics that is the most responsible for increasing my CS per minute. It actually feels like an unfair advantage when you know this trick. So, you know how there are plenty moments throughout the game where you just need to clear a wave, whether it's because an enemy roamed, or recall, you're just pushing to set up your own recall timing, or it's later on in the game and you're just shoving out a side lane. There are just plenty of times where you aren't under any threat of being traded with, and you just need to clear the wave. Well, in these spots, I used to miss so many last hits. That is, before I learned this one simple trick. You always want to focus the caster minions first. Here's the thing, most players in these spots focus melee minions. It makes sense as they're what's closest to you and being damaged by your minions. But that's exactly what makes them hard to last hit, the fact that your minions are damaging them. Instead, what you can do is kill all the caster minions first. It is quite literally impossible to miss the last hits since nothing else is damaging them but you. It's only once the melee minions get low enough from your own minions, you then last hit those. The reason why this works so well is that normally if you focus the melee minions, well, you'll probably miss like 1 CS from mistiming your auto attack with your own minions' damage. And then once those melees are dead, your wave starts damaging the casters, and the cycle repeats. You just miss another CS due to mistiming your auto attack again. When you focus the caster minions first, you actually guarantee you only have to time your last hits on half of the wave, meaning you get 100% accuracy on 3 minions. And remember, if you were in gold elo, you would just need to increase your CS per minute by 1 to be equal to a challenger. And as you can see, by implementing these 3 mechanics we just taught you, understanding how tower aggro works, using the stop command to last hit next to minions, and focusing the casters first, well, you can easily hit that goal and get 2 entire kills worth of gold. Alright, now for this next section, we have a collection of mechanics that are more standalone in nature. They're more hidden mechanics not a lot of players know about, but are really easy to use while being extremely useful in every single game. The first one is left clicking on an enemy champion to open up their champion panel in the top left corner to get insanely valuable information. It all has to do with the icons that appear below this panel. For example, when you proc LeBlanc's passive, a clone will appear. Well, to know which one is the real one, you just need to left click. The real LeBlanc will have an icon showing the timer of the passive, whereas the fake LeBlanc won't have that icon underneath the panel. The exact same trick works with Shaco, but in this case it's actually the cooldown of the rune he's running that will appear on the real one. So many players don't even realize this mechanic is in the game. You can even use this to know things like if Anivia has her egg up. You just left click on her, look below the panel, and the icon is gray, so now you know it's on cooldown. It even shows a ticking hand indicating when it will be back off cooldown. This even works with champions that have stacking mechanics like Kassadin, Aurelia, and Graves, just to name a few. It will show how many stacks they have below their champion panel as well. This can be super strong. For example, if you're chasing down a Kassadin and notice that he's low on mana. Well, each stack of Kassadin's ultimate actually will cost more mana, so you can check to see if he has his ultimate stacked up. If he does, well, then you know he can't escape. There are really so many usage cases for this trick. You can even see timers on players' runes like Electrocute, Taste of Blood, etc., all to time your trades better in lane. I mean, it's not even just champions. If you see an enemy has placed a regular stealth ward, you can actually left click on it and hover your mouse over this icon and it will tell you which champion placed that ward. This can be incredibly useful to identify whether a jungler or support is nearby looking to gank you, or if it was just your lane opponent dropping their own ward. There's far more to this than we can cover in this guide alone, but I promise, if you just get into the habit of left clicking on opponents and checking the icons under their panel, you'll realize there was this treasure trove of information under your nose the entire time. Moving on, next up we have the mechanic known as input buffering. Now, the name makes it sound way more fancy than it really is. It can even look really impressive, but it's actually incredibly simple to understand and execute. For those of you who are unaware, most champions, when they cast a spell on an enemy who is out of their range, well, the second they get within range, the game will automatically then cast the ability for you. This is very powerful since it allows the game to react for you. It basically gives you inhuman reaction times. For example, let's say you're playing Malzahar and are low in health, and someone with a mobility spell like LeBlanc is coming after you. All you have to do is press R on LeBlanc, and if she ever tries to engage on you, she will instantly be ulted at max range. Now, obviously, most players won't just jump into range and die to Malzahar, as they'll see you move forward aggressively once you press R on top of them. This is why to use this technique properly, you often want to weave in movement commands in between. So, for example, LeBlanc is coming after you, so you preemptively press R, and don't press anything else. You then see LeBlanc's character look away, meaning she's clicked behind her in order to get outside of your ultimate's range. This is then your moment for you to click away and run. Then, as you see LeBlanc's character look back at you, it means she's now clicking in front of her to try and chase you down, so you then preemptively press R once again. You can see how by using input buffering, it is quite literally impossible for LeBlanc to ever engage. Now, that is one form of input buffering, but there's another one that involves using flash. All you have to do is first cue your attack. So in this example, we have a Caitlyn auto-attacking, but it can be a spell instead. Then, once you cue the attack, you simply just flash within range, and the game will automatically attack at inhuman speeds. Keep in mind, if instead you try to flash first and then auto-attack, well, it will take you time to hover your mouse over the enemy champion and press right-click. That's time the enemy can use to flash away to safety or use a mobility spell of their own if they have one. A great example to demonstrate how important input buffering using flash is with Ahri's ability Charm. A lot of low elo Ahri players will always flash and then press Charm afterwards, which again is always going to be slower and allow enemies to react to it. Instead, you want to press Charm and then immediately flash after. Not only does this result in you instantly casting your ability, but it will actually combine the two animations of the Charm and the flash, making it even faster and nearly impossible to react to. This isn't just RE specific, the vast majority of champions in League of Legends can input buffer flash with an ability, so hop into practice mode on whatever champion you play and try it out for yourself. Next up, we have what's known as the Target Champions Only keybind. We highly recommend you rebind this to something you find comfortable. A common hotkey people use for this is the X key on your keyboard. When you hold down your bind for this, it makes it so that you can't target anything but champions with your auto attacks. It does not work on abilities, it's only auto attacks. This is extremely useful in so many scenarios, like when you're tower diving, it will prevent you from accidentally clicking the tower instead of the enemy champion. It pretty much is a necessity if you want to navigate through jungle camps as well. For example, champions with dash through mechanics like Yasuo would end up just aggroing the camp when trying to get into position. But with this keybind, they can move into the right angles without aggroing the camp. The only downside to this is that it can be very hard to cast abilities while also holding down the Target Champions Only command on your keyboard. So if you struggle with that issue, then you want to enable a new command called Treat Target Champions Only as a toggle. What this lets you do is, let's say you set Target Champions Only to X as we recommended. You only have to press it once and it will turn the setting on and you'll only auto attack champions, you don't have to hold it down. Then, when you press it again, it will go back to normal. Essentially, you don't have to hold it down and can just turn it on and off like a light switch. And for our final section, we have a hidden mechanic related to stealth wards called Residual Vision that pretty much no player even knows about. Notice how after Leona kills the stealth ward, how you can still see her as she walks away. Vision in the area will last for a much longer time than most people realize, as it's a whole 5 seconds despite the ward being removed. Notice how we can see the direction Leona moves towards after she kills the ward. Spotting the enemy is one thing, but knowing which way they path after is super broken. So if you see someone clearing your vision ward, watch them for that extra second or two to see which direction they head to after they kill it, as 99% of players don't realize they're actually being seen. Here's what's even crazier. For those who actually do know it exists, you can actually use it against them if you're the one killing the ward. After you kill the ward, just fake your path one way, then after 5 seconds pass, go in the opposite direction to completely confuse the opponent. Junglers are really good at abusing this trick to lull their opponents into a false sense of security, then walk right back and pick up an easy kill. Keep in mind though, this trick does not work when you kill a control ward. Control wards will drop vision immediately after they've been killed. It's only the stealth wards that will give the extended vision. In addition to this, if a stealth ward simply expires while an enemy is nearby, vision will not persist, as the ward actually needs to be killed in order to see this lingering effect. And don't forget our special limited time offer. We want you to go out and try to implement the mechanics that you just learned in this guide. From there, identify one mechanic that you're struggling with that you just can't seem to get the hang of despite trying to implement what we just taught you in this video. Then head to our website, as you'll find the full course for this video there. Then simply scroll down to the comment section in that course and we'll have a link to a Google form where you can submit a replay of yours where you struggled with that mechanic. That will also give you the opportunity to ask any questions that you have. Tell us exactly what you're struggling with and more. We will then take your submissions and expand the course using your replays, where we go into further detail teaching the mechanics that you guys struggled with the most. We already have over 2 hours of this additional content live on our website right now. Do keep in mind though, submissions will only be accepted for 1 month after this video goes live, so don't miss your opportunity. And if that wasn't enough to sweeten the deal, we've added a discount link in the description below, so make sure to click it to start leveling up your mechanics. And there you have it, 15 of the most important mechanics every player should know in League of Legends. As you can probably tell from me progressively losing my voice as the guide continued, we put a ton of effort into this one, so we hope you guys enjoyed it and found it helpful. As always, we here at skillcapped want to thank you for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.